Good evening, everyone. Let's start the journey of today from the point where we left at the last webinar, that was integers basics, and today we have been doing integers advanced. Uh, there would be a lot of things that I would be discussing majorly on the remainders, on the divisibility, but just pay attention not only to the solution but also on the questions. How do they actually frame the hard level questions on integer? See, the concept never changes, be it, so suppose if I take a prime number, the concept of a prime number will never ever change. Doesn't matter you're solving a Q40 level question or a 45 or a 48 or a 51. But what changes is phrases, group of certain words, and they always add up a concept with another concept, or maybe a broad concept with another broad concept to bring in more difficulty. So most of the candidates either fail to comprehend it, or they even have challenges to understand where to start the solution from. So this is what I'll be discussing in and out today. So starting with the basic agenda, talking about math revolution as I always do, a quick GMAT math overview. This will be especially upon how to get Q50, 51. That is what our major aim is. Integers advanced is our today's topic for the evening. And yes, the conventional approach versus math revolution approach. This is a feedback that I'll be looking forward to from your side. Talking about math revolution, I mean, we are global 2001 after establishing in South Korea. It's been 190 plus countries site visits and 130 plus countries member across, and almost 41,000 plus students now. And 90% of those, or even more than that, we are yet to receive the recent statistical analytics from the backend team so that we could have updated. But the current number says the same. It's a 90% plus who have scored 49 out of 51. And it's been, so we launched a Math Revolution global website in October 2015. The goal of GMAT Math is the same that every aspirant has. We cannot at all settle with 45 pointers. 45 pointers is too much less. I mean, we are made up at least for 48, 49. I'm not talking about 50, 51. That is okay. That's the hardest level. But 48, 49 sounds good to my ESR. It good to, it is good to my ears. Even it is good for my university application as well. So what is the key idea behind, scoring 50, 51? So I've been actually not only promoting but recommending this two approaches that would definitely help you to score 50, 51, which is a variable for TS, and IV approach for PS. And let's talk about the founder, Max. He's the mastermind behind, this particular world's unique first approach, which is a variable approach. After analyzing, solving, reciprocating, and with his patience, perseverance, and a lot of knowledge across 10,000 questions, he has come across this uh, approach. Before that, he has already been a part of GMAT at least 27 times to understand the pedagogy of GMAT questions, because it has concurrently changed over the years. So in the year 2009, it used to be of 900. Post 2012 it was 800 in total. So there are a lot of couple of changes that has been brought to standardized test, and it's not GMAT. There are a lot of those in the world who have set to some changes also. Talking about the characteristics of math revolution, so we have the uniqueness because we have got the world's first variable approach and IV approach. And what does it mean that it is irrelevance to current math skills? So it doesn't matter. I mean, like, are you from a math background or a non-math background? See, what I know is everyone is from the math background, because there's no one on this particular earth who has never studied math. It's only about, like, if it's your profession, if it's a degree, if it's a course, then you have always carried that learning of math throughout, and with a higher level of, those calculus and engineering mathematics and all those things. But there are other well designed and defined course stream as well, like commerce, art, humanities, and a lot of those therein where, the touch with the math leaves. And that is wherein a non-math background word comes into a picture. So our material has been designed, the approaches has been designed in such a way that a non-math background student can easily connect. Also, a person who comes with a 10 years to 15 years experience from the finance domain or maybe marketing domain, who had studied math for a time being more than the non-math background student, but have left over the period of 10 months or 10 years maybe, could easily connect through it. Quickness, because you will always have at least a 10 minutes left out in your exam, so you'll be able to complete all the questions at least 10 minutes or at least 5 minutes before. Accuracy definitely will give you the 100% result. So the best strategies for 50-51, conventional approaches are too long and they're too wordy. We cannot definitely take it and consideration that applying those approach can only give me the 50-51. We often tend to jump on our error logs. We always talk about our error doings, error findings, and we pay much attention to those instead of at least paying attention to questions which are correct, but I have taken a lot of time. To be very much honest, if I'm taking 4 minutes time to get an accurate answer, it will, that 4 minutes time for at least five questions, which makes it 20 minutes, will definitely give a impact on other set of questions which you may have done easily, but because of the lack of time, you rushed and you made an error. So the approaches has to be a time bounded, it has to be a unique, it has to be time saving, and conventional approach doesn't fit into those parameters. But when we talk about the IV approach, when we talk about the variable approach, it gives you a lot of logics to connect through, because you solve less, you think more, you connect more through the concept and your competence. And then it's been seen, like, the number of students getting 50-51 has increased over the period of months and years. So let's talk and let's start about the basic. This slide was also used in my last webinar because it gives you a understanding of what an integer is. So that is why I'm just reusing the same slide. So integers are something which is a whole number. So you'll not see any sort of decimal or a fractions into it. When I say integers, my mind always talks about a negative first, because we always tend to take a positive number, leaving behind a negative concept. For me, my mind has been mapped in such a way that I always start with a negative number. So integers, okay, -3, -2, -7, and often I'll come to zero, and then I'll go to the positive. So that's not at all a problem. So it's a negative, zero, and positive, NZP. You can name it as you want to, but that is what we call as integer. Now let's talk about the consecutive integer. Now let me tell you, this is an advanced topic just because the fact that this will not only be used into integers question, but in statistics questions also. So this is wherein we see that how does it transit from one broad topic of number property to another broad topic of statistics. So let's talk about the consecutive integer. There are a lot of ways to understand consecutive integer, define a consecutive integer, infer the consecutive integers. Some say that the common difference would be always one, some say that they're just placed adjacent to each other. So it's up to you, how do you want to actually understand it and remember it. So they just come one after another. So if I have to say there is a n, on the left hand side it should be n minus 1, on the right hand side it should be n plus 1, and this is how we always proceed with the consecutive integers. Getting ahead, this is the first property of the consecutive integer. Now see, understand, I just said it is one of the key topic that would help in statistics also, and they have come up with the descriptive statistics key terms, median and average. So the median of the set would always be equal to the mean if we are talking about consecutive integers. So let's say if I have five numbers here with a consecutive 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. My median is 3. So now my mean, so now the concern is I don't have to actually sum all this 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 4 plus 5. That gives me 15 divided by 5. So sum over total is an average, right? But now when it is being said that they are consecutive, or it is been noted that they are consecutive, I don't have to actually sum and do the total and find the average. So therein where you apply the logic. This is just to show you that the median and the average is same, because that is what the property says. So that is why it has been used like 15 over 5 equals to 3. But if in question it says the consecutive integer, my mind should always reciprocate as, okay, so my mean would be equals to median. So my, even though if the question is asking me to find the mean, I'll always find the median because they both has to be equal. So this is where I apply the logics. This is where I apply the shortcut. Now, how does the DS questions on the consecutive integers? So you need to find the start number. If you get to know the start number, then you're counting numbers in the original conditions. So there are two cases that I'll be talking about. If your original condition, that is your question stem, has two variables. I'm talking something which is visible on the left side of the screen right now, so don't get confused. That is a case one. So if your original condition or your question stem has got two variables, out of which one is the start number and second is the counting number, then the number of variable is always 2. Vice versa, if your original condition gets one variable, that means either a start number is given or the counting number is given. So when both are given, it's a 2 variable, but when either of them is given, then it has to be a 1 variable condition. Now, having said this, let's go on to a question to see this. Now, it says there are consecutive integers. For my mind says median equals to mean. I'm ready. So there are consecutive integers in which 7 is the smallest integer. This word is smallest gives a lot of meaning to me. But they have not given how many integers are there. They just say there are consecutive integers in which 7 is the smallest. If I start from 7, I can go till infinity. Now it says how many integers are there. So I have to find the total number of integers here. That is what my question says. The supporting statements are the median of the integer is 10. The second supporting statement is the mean of the integers is 4 greater than their range. They're talking about consecutive integer as a concept. They brought a condition on median, mean, and range. This is how a Q48 level question looks like. They will bring in everything into a single question set. So if you just know about a range, you just know about a median, you just know about a mean, I won't say that it is not possible to solve a question, but if you could definitely hold a relationship among it, then you will not take more time to either start solving a question or comprehend a question or to end it. Otherwise, the major time taken by the students are they break it. So they solve median, they solve mean, they solve range, and then they are stuck how to relate it all together. So this is wherein you need to actually work upon if you have a challenges. Now, since it's a DS question, I'll definitely apply the variable approach. For we are dealing with the consecutive integers right now. So the first thing first is it a 2 variable question or a 1 variable question? That can give me a lot of understanding. And the numbers are n plus 1, n plus 2. This is how the consecutive integers goes. So if I know the starting number, if I know the counting number, then it would be 2 variable. So applying the 3 steps, it says we have to find the number of integer if 7 is the smallest integer. So the start number is given, but a counting number is not given because that is what they have asked, how many integers are there. So this is a case 2 right now. So if I have original condition, if I get two variables, the starting number and the counting number, and then I have a one equation which says the starting number is 7. I would require one more equation, and hence D should be my probable answer. When I say D is my probable answer, I'll definitely jump to condition 1 to check its sufficiency. It says the median of the integers is 10. Now the smallest integer is 7, the median is 10, and you're dealing with the consecutive integer. This can only happen when you have a 3 integers on the other side of the median, because it's 10, it's not 10.5. So if it is a 10, it has to be a centrally located number. So out of 3 numbers, if you have 3 numbers starting from 7, you would always end up at 7, 8, 9. If you end up at 10, that cannot be a median. If you add up 11 also, then your median would be 9. If you add up 12, then your median would be 9.5. If you add 30 into the list, then your median would be 10. So that is how you need to work upon. You could also say that 10 minus 7 would be 3. This is the biggest shortcut that I can tell you, because the median is 10, the smallest number is 7. That means 10 minus 7 is 3. Three numbers has to be there on the either side of the median just because they are consecutive. So the number of integers would be total 7. So counting number has been there, which is unique, which is 7. So this condition is sufficient. Now let's talk about the second condition, which relates mean and range. Now, when I say that the average of the integer is 4 greater than their range, that means the median has to be 4 greater than their range. Or range is 4 less than the median. This is what the case is. Now, I always have a 7 as the smallest integer. So range is nothing, it's the largest minus the smallest number. Your smallest number here would be 7, which would be nothing but median minus 4. So largest minus median, this has to be equal. Pay attention to this thing very carefully. Largest minus 7, that would be has to be equals to median minus 4, because the relation says the same. The median is 4 greater than the range. So when you subtract 4 out of median, then only it would be equal to range. So largest minus 7 is equals to median minus 4. So largest minus median becomes 3. So if you are subtracting largest number and the median and their difference is 3, that means there are 3 numbers on the either side of the median. So if there are 3 numbers on the either side of the median and one number is median itself, I get total 7 numbers in unique. So my this condition is also sufficient. And I have been telling this many a times during my webinars as well, and also whatever posting I does over the GMAT club, solving the DS questions by variable approach, that if your condition 1 is equals to your condition 2, 95% times or more, your answer would be D. So it has to be always easy to understand that when condition 1, condition 2, it's a 95%, your answer would be D. Each condition alone is sufficient, our job is done. Now let's proceed to another set of understanding, 2 and 3 consecutive integers. Now what is this 2 and 3 consecutive integers? They looks very easy, but they are very much trapful. So please pay attention here. Let the starting number of 2 consecutive integers is equals to n. Now when we talk about the product of 2 consecutive integers, definitely it would be like n into n plus 1. So it would be always even. So see, I'm not saying that n has to be even or n plus 1 is to be even. It's just a product of 2 consecutive integer is always even, because if you have an odd number, the next would be even. Or if you start from an even number, the next would be odd. So even times odd is always an even number. Sum of 2 consecutive integers would always be an odd, because if you add up even and odd, you always get an odd. So this is one of the fundamental property that is majorly applied in 2 consecutive integers. This is what we could see. So 1 times 2 is 2, 2 times 3 is 6, all numbers are even. And over here, when we add those, 1 plus 2 is 3, which is an odd, 2 plus 3 is 5, which is an odd again, 3 plus 4 is 7, which is an odd again, 37 plus 38 gives you 75, which is odd again. So that's all numbers are odd. Now going ahead with the 3 consecutive integers, n into n plus 1 into n plus 2. So if you're starting with an even times odd times even, or even plus odd plus even. But that is not the only case that I can consider. See, understand, I'm taking this webinar to actually not give you the knowledge. You guys are already an expert, you know a lot of these properties. I'm actually taking this webinar or spatial integers advanced to tell you that, what sort of question actually comes when we deal with a concept. For this, I'm just going back to the slide. For 2 consecutive integers, I've discussed the property of their product and their sum. That doesn't mean that I'll only discuss the same property for three consecutive integers. The property here which I'm trying to discuss is something which is majorly used in the questions, be it a factorial question, because factorial is always a product of consecutive integers. So this is wherein my major focus is. So product of three consecutive integer is always multiple of 6. Always remember this. And sum of three consecutive integers is always a multiple of 3. Always remember this. Product of three consecutive integer is multiple of 6. Sum of three consecutive integer is multiple of 3. So 2 times 3 times 4 is 24, multiple of 6. 2 plus 3 plus 4 is 9, multiple of 3. Now let's talk about this. Which of the following cannot be the sum of two consecutive integers? I don't want you guys to actually drill yourself setting up some hit and trial method to solve this. We should know the starting number. Then we have the knowledge of the product of two consecutive integer, the sum of two consecutive integers. So now we know that the sum of two consecutive integers will always be an odd. When I know this, I'll quickly jump to the options to check by chance if there is any even. Right now, it is being seen that C22, that is an even number. Now the sum of two consecutive integers can never ever be even. So that particular option is out. Did I get the answer from there? Yes. So did I put any numbers here? No. I have just put the concept. That is it. Anytime, whenever you're solving the questions based on this concepts or the logics of even, odd, I'll highly recommend never try putting the values until you are about to give up. Be it any sort of question, maybe fractional part, maybe n over cube root of n is an integer, doesn't matter. Try focusing on to it so that you'll be able to keep the logic. Because when you keep the numbers, you yourself are not sure how many possible number sets you have to actually put in to check that condition. Because 2 plus 2 is 4, 2 times 2 is also 4. The pattern is not clear to me at least. So I'm not sure, do I have to do 3 plus 3 or 3 times 3, because that will give me 6 or a 9. So now the condition is, you may get equality on -2 also, -1 also. That doesn't mean -3 -4 would be equal for such sort of expressions. Always keep the values for hit and trial right away at the start, or don't keep it right away at the start. When you look at the question, there could be possibility that this question cannot be solved without putting a numbers, or there are couple of set of numbers on which this expression would give me a difference and I can definitely mark it. Otherwise, always keep the numbers hit and trial method at the end when you're about to leave that question, at least after 30 to 40 seconds of minute, or sorry, of the time. Okay, going ahead with this consecutive even and consecutive odd. So when we talk about consecutive integers, we need to deal with this to spatial prospect. Consecutive evens, like we know it's -4, so it starts -6, -4, -2, 0, 2, 4, 6, 8, and so on. So it's a 2n. That is what the even number looks like. So 2n minus 2 and 2n plus 2 would be the, you know, I would say the curve for this particular even integers. For odd integers, we always start with 2n plus 1. So just add 2 to. So now if you see the between every even integers which are consecutive, the difference is of 2, and so does the difference for the odd integers are again 2. So if it's a 2n plus 1, it has to be 2n plus 3, 2n minus 1, and 2n minus 3. This is how the curve goes. So now if the question like this appears onto the GMAT exam, which of the following could be the value of the sum of four consecutive odd numbers? They're asking could be the value of sum of four consecutive odd numbers. Now they're asking for the four consecutive odd numbers. Now the concern is very simple. The four consecutive odd numbers, 2n plus 1, 2n minus 1, 2n plus 3, and 2n minus 3. Most easiest set of numbers to be considered so that when you add those up, see, there hardly there any problem to take 2n plus 1, 2n plus 3, 2n plus 5, and 2n plus 7. But if you could take two positives and two negatives, so that when we sum up, the numbers automatically get cancelled, like minus 3 gets cancelled with plus 3 and minus 1 gets cancelled with plus 1. I'm just hardly left with 2 and 4 times, which is 8n. So now I know that whatever the sum will be has to be a multiple of 8. When I say has to be a multiple of 8, job is done. A is the correct answer, because it's not that difficult to find out the multiple of 8. So that is what it says. You can use 2n plus 1, 2n plus 3, 2n plus 5 as well. So now the concern is, without putting the values, you can always have these numbers. Now, before going ahead, I would also like to add up something before starting this general reminders, that it is not at all guaranteed that if someone solves maybe 100 questions, 200 or 300 questions on hardest level, the GMAT is in the pocket or it's in the reach. If you're not able to balance how much time has to be taken to solve the easiest level of question and how much time should I devote to a hardest level of question, then you will always have the challenge with the timing. Second, you being a GMAT aspirant, if have managed to solve at least a 500 questions in your life over the period of months, because you've been preparing for your GMAT, and when a question comes onto your screen, if you could not even tell that that particular question falls under which level, is it a Q40, 45, 48, 51, or maybe below 40, and I'm just talking about plus minus 2, that's okay. Even if you say Q43 and if it happens to be Q41, that is okay. But if you're not able to judge where does this question fall from, will I lose more marks on this if I make an error on this, because this is the hardest level question, or how would it be for me if I make an error, unfortunately, on this question, but will I lose a small margin because this is an easy level question? If you, being a GMAT aspirant, cannot have that understanding, that means you have never been through a process of understanding how the questions are formed. You have always been into a prototype of solving a question, not understanding the question format. Therein where the major challenges occur. Okay, coming on to the next slide, that is general reminders. One of the, I would say, the favorite topic of the GMAC body. They often talk about this reminders and divisibilities, and I've taken this divisibility, a direct substitution method, in the first webinar. In the last webinar of integers basic, you can often go back to the YouTube and see onto our math revolution posters. So if a question asks for the value of remainder after a division of term containing an exponent p, so right now we are not just talking about those fifth or sixth grades or year six, year five grade divisions. We're talking about a number being raised to a good amount of power being divided by something, and we need to find the uh, remainder. So we will just discuss what happens, like, find the remainder when 5 to the power 4 is divided by 4. So I'm not bothered about the power here, right? I know 5 to the power 4 is 625. Now, no one has to actually cram it because we do it so often that it's been there into our mind. So 625 by 4, the last two digit is what we see for the divisibility of 4. So 25 divided by 4 will give me a remainder as a 1. But what if it was 55 to the power 4? Then again, it is not practically possible for me. I'm not saying it is not possible for you to multiply 55 to itself 4 times. You can do it. But unfortunately, as we don't have a whole day on the GMAT test, we need to come up with something therein where I don't have to multiply, because GMAT is not checking my multiplication process or abilities. So this remainder, like this question, 79 to the power 5 is divided by 7. I need to get through the remainder for this. When I have to get through the remainder, I have to actually compute and divide. And when we say compute and divide, let's see how does it look like. So it says, like, if I have to divide 7 to the power, 20, 79 to the power 5 is divided by 7. The most basic way to do it is I'll just deal with 9. When I'll just deal with 9 to the power 5, I know 9 to the power 1 will give me 9, but 9 square gives me 1, 9. So 9 to the power 1 will always give me 9, 9 square always gives me 1. And therein where 9 to the power odd will give me 7. So 9 to the power 5, it can be written in terms of 7 to get the answer quickly. Okay, let's go with the DS question, which says for positive integer m and n, when 7 to the power 2m plus n is divided by 8, what is the remainder? Now let's break this question first to understand what are they trying to ask. For positive integers, it is an integer, but it's a positive. When 7 to the power of 2m and then plus n is divided by 8, m and n is unknown, what is the remainder? Now, if I see here directly, it says m equals to 2, n equals to 1. For me, it looks like if I put those both here, C should be enough to solve because there are two variables. Let's see if we could modify it somewhere. So if I 7 to the power 2m can be written as 7 square whole to the power m plus n divided by 8 like this. 7 square automatically becomes 49 divided by 49 to the power of something plus n, and that is being getting divisible by 8. Now, if I divide this 49 directly by 8, I'll always get a remainder of 1. So it's nothing but I'm getting a remainder of 1 to the power m, and that is getting added to plus n. Now, for me, it doesn't matter that, if I'm raising 1 to the power m, no matter whatever you raise on the to the top of 1, it would always remain 1. I agree to the fact that the negative powers would change the value, but again, we're just considering the positive integers. That is what the question says. So 1 to the power m will not have any impact on this particular question. That means m doesn't has an impact on this question. So m is always positive. So the only thing that will define here would be n. So now the trap was this. This is what I always used to talk. There is a trap question, or if there is integers. So if so this is what I talk about, CMT4A, that if it looks like that C is your answer, hold back because it's an integers question. Always start checking A and B first. The students or the attendees who are going through our course right now, uh, I'm repeating because they will be able to reconnect very easily. For the integers question, if it feels like C will be your answer, always start with A and B to check because that's a catch. And they show it so easily that any of you could get a trap into 7 to the power 2m plus n, two variables. I can get the value from m and n putting, okay, C should be the answer. And this error usually happens when you are in rush because you have already consumed a lot of your time for other questions. So in this question, we are just minting to find the value of n. So if you're minting to find the value of n, 79 to the power 5, this was the question that we were discussing before. So 79 to the power 5, that would say 32. It contains a factor 7. The remainder would be 0. Over here, the remainder is 4. All right, so just go back to this question. What is the remainder when 79 to the power 5 is divided by 7? So 79 can be already written as 7 times 11 plus 2. So the remainder is 2. Now when this 2 is being raised to the power of 5, which becomes 32. And then if you divide it by 7, 7 times 4 is 28, 32, 48, 4 is the remainder. So this question is automatically solved. The other question that we were discussing right now is 7 to the power 2m plus n is divided by 8. So this is the remainder question. Let's look at the condition 2. N is equals to 1. So remainder when 2 divided by 8 is already 2. Because 7 to the power 2m, now this value gonna give you 1. So we already modified it to 1 to the power m plus n. 1 to the power m is 1. N is also 1. So 1 plus 1 is 2. So overall, what I'm doing is I'm just dividing 2 by 8. So my remainder would be 2. This condition is sufficient. Now condition 1 says m equals to 2. But what about n? N could be anything. Agree to the fact that it's a positive, but it could be anything. So this is not sufficient. So now this is always to be considered that condition 2 alone is sufficient in this particular question. Let's talk about the divisibility by 3 or 9. So the remainder question after we divide it by, so there is a positive integer n, and it has to be divided by 3 or 9. So when we talk about 3 or 9, we always remember that it's a sum of digit that has to be divisible. So like if we have 112, the number, so 2 plus 1 plus 1, add up to 4. So now when these numbers are divisible by, when you divide them by 3, the remainder is 1. So just add up, so you'll get to know what the remainder is. When this number is divided by 9, the remainder is 4, because they all add up to 4. Let's talk about this DS question. What is the remainder when a 5-digit positive integer? Now we're talking about a positive integer which has a 5-digit. They have represented that 5-digit as PQ, comma PQP, international system for denotion of the number. PQ, comma PQP is divided by 3. Now again, we are dealing with P and Q. If you could get to know the value of P and Q, you can easily get to know that number, and that you can definitely divide it by 3 to get the remainder. So again, they've framed the question like, giving you the value of P and Q, keeping that PQ so visible, so lucrative, so attractive that okay, if I get to know P and Q, okay, it's 2 3 2 3 2, okay, fine. So I can definitely 2 3 2 3. So that's a 10 plus 3 2 12. So the remainder should be 0. So for me, like, answer goes as C right now. I'm not paying much attention to the words like integers or all. Fine. Now I just had 1 minute. I just paid my attention to the PQ needed. I marked C. I went ahead. Now the variable approach, when I apply, I see an integer here. Okay, fine. Let's see. I'll just modify this question first. If I just add up this numbers like P plus Q plus P plus Q plus P, ultimately that becomes 3P plus 2Q. Now, when you know that 3P is 3 times P, that is already a factor of 3. So that is already a multiple of 3. So 3P would always be divisible by 3. So the concern is not P here, but the concern is Q. That means we just have to make sure if we have a value of Q, job is done. So again, I have escaped out of the trap. I'm not marking C. It seems C, but I'm not marking C here. Because there's an integer word, variable approach will say me, will definitely ask me to go to A and check, go to B and check. But I modified it, so I know I need a value of Q. If I go to the condition number 2, which says Q is 3, 3P plus 2Q, that means 3P plus 6. If I divide 3P plus 6 by 3, it will give me the remainder as 0. My condition is sufficient. But if I talk about condition number 1, which is P equals to 2, I don't know what is the value of Q, and hence my remainder could be 0 also. My remainder could be anything. That means it's not sufficient. So I'm not going to mark my answer as C, which was pretty visible, but variable approach saved me, and I'm marking my answer as B here. This is the trap questions I'm talking about. This is integer 5051 level question. They trap it, the mix-up concept. Let's talk about divisibility by 4 or 8. So this is something which I've done in my last webinar as well. For 4, it's always the last 2 digits that we focus upon. For 8, it's always the last 3 digits that we focus upon. And these are the random examples. Okay, now let's talk about this. This is something which is very interesting. Suppose your number is 271. Okay, 2713145327226. So if I remove that 26 and if I make that 700, then I can write it as 2713145322700. It will be definitely divisible by 4. I can break this 2713145322700 as 27131453227 times 100. 100 can be broken as 25 times 4. If I could see here 4, that means this number is divisible by 4. So what am I left out here is only 26. And that would decide whether this number is divisible by 4 or not. And that is why we say that the last 2 digit plays an important role to understand where it is divisible by 4 or not. Similarly, for 8, like 726, because 1000, again, that would be divisible by 8 as a factor. Now let's talk about this question. There's a positive 6 digit integer now, which is represented as 569K90. Now, out of this 6 digit, I already have a 5. I'm not aware about K. K is a positive 1 digit integer. Okay. Which of the following options cannot be the factor of 569K90? It should not be that difficult question. To be honest, I have a 6 digit integer and I just have to check a divisibility by of a various numbers here. So let's talk about this. You have even numbers with a unit digit 0. It's a multiple of 2 and 5. Option goes out. I'm left out with 3, 4, and 7. K is still not known to us. Let's add up all this. It gets me 5 plus 6, which is 11. 11 plus 9 is 20. 20 plus 9 is 29. 29 plus 0, no effect, is 29. 29 plus K. Now, if 29 is 1 or 4 or 7, then it would be divisible by 3. Let's talk about the divisibility by 4. The last 2 digits. Doesn't matter what a K is, but last 2 digit 90, that is not divisible by 5. So obviously the 6 digit integer will not be divisible by 5, and it does not depend on K as well. So right now 2 and 5 is out, 4 is again out, 3 is still in the loop because there are a lot of values of K for which 3 could divide this number. 7 is still there. If K equals to 5, then this number would be divisible by 7. Which of the following options cannot be factor of 569K90? Now 2 and 5 is already a factor. 3 could be a factor if K is 147. 7 will be a factor if K equals to 5. So in all the possible conditions, whatever it is, 4 is the only number that does not depend upon the K because it talks about the last 2 digit, which is 90, and hence D would be the correct answer. Estimated integer, rounding off, very much important, very much required and recommended always to do so that you are quick able to solve big calculation. So if the question wants us to find the closest integer to 0.97, it is always 1. Don't get confused with the greatest integer or the least integer function. It's a normal closest integer to 0.97, and hence it is 1 right now. So estimation or rounding off is the most likely answer. So you can make a note of this. If actual values and the estimated values appear together, then there are too many variables that we talk about. So the most likely answer happens to be E. Like this is an example given. If John estimates the age of Tom and the age of Tom's father, what is the difference between the sum of the actual age of Tom and actual age of Tom's father, and the sum of the estimated age of Tom and the estimated age of his father? Now, if we just talk about, there are two variables for the actual age of Tom and Tom's father, but there are additional two variables which are the estimated. Overall, we get a four variable. For four variables, we will be having two supporting equations to give me two equations. Then I'll still be left short of two equations, so my answer would be E. Now let's talk about this particular question. Which of the following is an approximation of 0.999 times 1 decimal 3 times 9 minus 1.496 times 0.514? Calculator allowed. I'll not take even 5 seconds to solve this question. No calculator. I still have to run down through a lot of things. 0.999 is okay to demystify. 1.99 again is okay. 1.496 is pretty difficult. 0.514 out of a loop. So only thing which I could say when the question itself says which of the following is an approximation of, I'll be also doing and working upon the approximation because they've been just looking to the approximate value. So let's approximate all the terms. So let's write 0.999 as 1, 1.99 as 2, 1.496 as 1.5, and 0.514 is 0.5. Now, when you round off, always make sure that you don't round off to the higher limits. Like 0.514 is taken as 1, and 1.496 has to be taken as 1. No, always keep into your loop to the next possible easy value which you could calculate. So 0.999 is 1, 1.999 is 2. So that becomes 1 times 2, which is 2, minus 1.496 taken as 1.5, and zero point 0.5 is 1.4 is taken as zero point 0.5. So that becomes 1.5 into zero point 0.5 is 0.75. So 2 minus 0.75 would be 1.25. So in this manner, approximation helps you to get the answer E. Let's talk about this question, which is a DS question. John is trying to build a rectangular shaped garden. He estimated the length and the width of the garden. He has already estimated it. Later, he measured the actual length. The question is talking about the estimation and the actual length and width of the garden. What is the area? They are finding the actual value. They're trying to retrieve the actual value of this particular garden now in the terms of area. Condition 1 says that the estimated length of the garden is 200 meters and the estimated width is 100 meters. It could be more than 200, less than 200, or it could be anything because it's an estimated. Second condition says the difference between the actual length and the estimated length is 1 meter. Now, when you say it's a difference between the length actual and the estimated length is 1 meter, I'm not still sure it whether it could be 199 or whether it could be 201 because the difference is still 1. Also, the difference between the actual width and the estimated width is 1 meter. So it could be either 99 or 101. So from Forts right now, my mind is being confused with a lot of things because there are two variables and then there happens to be four possible cases for all. But we know that we have to be working upon the approximation as we're dealing with estimated part. So it'll be definitely taking in consideration the rounding of concept. So let's start with the modifying. If we could do something, a modification part into it, we'll just assign a variable like estimated length is a small l, estimated width is small w, actual length is capital L, and actual width is capital W. After assigning this variable, I get to know there are four variables, but there are only two conditions to support. So my possible answer would be E. There's no trap word that I can see here. So going ahead with this, the most likely answer is E. If E has to be an answer, that can only be possible when I check both the conditions combined. Before that, I cannot answer E. So for this, I'll combine both the condition. I'll not check A and B separately in order, and I'll be thus saving my time. So let's talk about this. L is 200, which is a small l. A small w is 100 meters. Capital L is 200 plus minus 1, and capital W is 100 plus minus 1. Now the possible area of LW would be 199 into 99. So there are four possible cases that I will get here. When I'm getting a four possible cases, answer itself is E then. Simple. So in this scenario, it's 199.99. And that is what I said at the start of the question itself. Four variables, E has to be possible answer. And even there's not much to round it off because the numbers were pure integers in this, like 100 and 200. But if you get into some decimal values, you can always use a rounding off concept. Okay, fine. Now, what is a Gaussian integer? Now, this is something I was actually talking in the last slide, that don't assume until it is given. Greatest integer less than, or least integer greater than. A bit confusing terms, but if you just pay attention to the words greatest integer less than or equal to a number, or least integer greater than or equal to a number. When you talk about a least integer greater than or equal to, you always round it up. When you talk about the greatest integer, it is always rounded down. This is a proper way to write it, but again, the function may be denoted any which ways. Like for example, it says 1.6. First of all, find all the great integers which are equal to 1.6 or greater than it. So equal to 1.6, there is no integer because it itself is not an integer. So the first integer that comes to the mind is 2. Then the next is 3. Then the 4. We are finding all the greater integers than 1.6. So there are 2, 3, 4, 5 up to infinity. Now out of this set, you need to find the least integer, which is 2. See, they cannot ask you to find the greatest integer greater than, because that will be infinity. They cannot ask you to find the least integer less than, because that will be minus infinity. So it's like find all the numbers, find all the integers which are greater than this number which is written into the bracket, and then out of it pick the least. And in the second concept, it says find all the numbers which are less than this number, and out of this find the greatest. That means I'm just finding the at most left and the right number of this particular number which is written in the bracket, because 2 is not at the extreme, but 2 is just next to the right of 1.6, and 1 would be just to the left to the 1.6. I mean, this is, I've told you 3 to 4 ways how do you comprehend this so that you don't get confused. So let's talk about this. If this is the greatest integer less than or equal to x, what is the value of square root 3 written into the function, square root 7 written into the function, square root 10 written into the function? Let's talk about this. Is one of the easiest question, it feels like. It's square root of 3. We're dealing with the greatest integer less than or equal to x. So if we could just make out, we need to round down the integers. So now see, understand, square root of 3 would definitely lie between square root of 1 and square root of 4, which is 2. Square root of 7 and square root of 9 would lie between 2 and square root of 9, which is 3. And square root of 10 would lie between 3 and square root of 16, which is 4. So if you start from 1, 2, 3, and 4, this is the pattern that you're gonna get. 1 is less than square root of 3, which is less than 2. So the greatest integer less than or equal to x would be 1. Similarly, for square root 7, it lies between 2 and 3. So for it, the greatest integer less than or equal to square root 7 would be 2. And for root 10, it would be 3. So you've already got the answer. You just have to add up 1 plus 2 plus 3, which is equals to 6. Now, why this was solved like this? If someone doesn't able to recall the values of square root 3, 7, and 10, it's not necessary that if I'm able to recall that during a hard, you know, GMAT pressured environment, is square root of 3, 1.732. What if I'm not able to recall it? Then if I'm able to recall it, square root of 3 is 1.732. I know the integer, greatest integer less than or equal to be 1. For square root 7, it is 2 point something, because 3 gives me 9 and 2 gives me 4. It's middle, so it's 2 point something. So it should be 2. Square root of 10 would be 3 point something, because it's more than 9, which is, and the square root of 9 is 3, so it's 3 point something. So it should be 3. So if I know the values, it's okay. What if I don't know the values? Then you should understand how do I range it, where will this square root 3 lies? So just go to the perfect square, check the perfect squares and try settling up this value in the middle of those, and your job would be done. So the answer for this question was 6. Now let's talk about a DS question. If this x is the least integer, it's a least integer greater than or equal to x. So we have to round up. Now what is the value of x plus y? Okay. So x plus y is in the function, whereas the condition that are given to us are itself a function. So we just pay attention to the least integer greater than. I'll find all the greater than values first, and then I'll find the smallest value out of those. So it doesn't have nothing much to modify in this particular question. So simply I deal with the variable approach from the step 2 and 3, which says there would be two variables and I need two equations. So possibly the answer should be C. If the possible answer is C, then I have to combine both the conditions together. So it says mod x is equals to 1 and mod y is equals to 2. If it says mod x is equals to 1, then x should be greater than 0 and it should be less than equals to 1, because it's a 0 point something that will give you 1, 2, 3, 4, all those numbers greater than it, and out of which 1 is the least. That means x should be greater than 0, but it should be less than equals to 1. Similarly, when y is equals to 2, that means it's just the y is y is a number and 2 is just right to it, that y has to be less than 2. So it's very simple that y could be less than or equals to 2, but it has to be greater than 1, because 1 itself is an integer. So the next number that would be close to that is 2, it would be only close to 1 point something. So y lies between 1 and 2. If I add up both, it gets me x plus y, which is between 1 and 3. Now, when I say x plus y is 1 and it is less than equals to 3, it could be 0.1 and 1.1. It could be 1.2, because 1.2 gonna give me 1. 1 plus 2 equals to 3, that gets me 3. So this condition is not sufficient. I can get any values from this because it is greater than 1, but it is less than equals to 3. So any possible values is possible. So E is the correct answer. Let's talk about, there are a lot of points that I have discussed on factors and prime factors in the previous webinar. The two important points that I want to talk about is consider the same and the different cases, and exponents have no effect on the number of prime factors. Now, what does it mean? Let's talk about this into detail. Like it says 2 cube 3 to the power 5, 2 to the power 7, 3, 6, or 2, 11, 3 to, they all have the same prime factors. Doesn't matter that how many or what is the power here, but the number of prime factors here, they have the same prime factors, which are 2 and 3. See, prime factors are 2 and 3, number of prime factors would be different. So exponent doesn't has a impact on the prime factors. Like it says, if a and b are the prime numbers and n is a positive integer, how many different factors of a multiplying to b to the power n? Again, it looks to me like if I could get the value of a and n, I could get the answer. It's making me move towards C, but let's see if I could make out something from modifying it. It says that a and b are prime numbers, n is a positive integer. What is the power of a here? 1. So that makes it 1 plus 1. What is the power of b here? N. So that makes it n plus 1. So all in total, it makes 2n plus 2. Now, if a and b are same, the number of factors would be n plus 2. So I have three variables here, which are a, b, and n. So I need a three equations. So indirectly, I need most likely answer to be E. I'll just combine both the conditions, which are a equals to 3 and n equals to 3. But b is still left out. Also, I cannot be sure about that a and b are same or not. If a and b are same, then it would be a different case. So in this case, if a and b are same, then the number of factors are 3 dot 3 to the power 3, which is 3 to the power 4. 4 plus 1 is 5. But what if like b is 2? So if b is 2, then again it becomes 8. So if they are same, then definitely by the exponential rule I can solve, and the number of factors would be 5. But if they're different, then I cannot solve to the exponential rule. I have to take their powers separately, which gives me 8. So again, I don't have a unique answer. So the answer goes as E. So you need to be very much sure about whether this A and B are same or not. Now, what is a relative prime number? So it should have a only common factor of 1. So only common factor of two or more positive integer is 1, like 3 and 5. They're already a prime number, but their relative prime number is the relative prime number because their GCD is 1. They have only common factor as 1. 4 and 6 are not relative prime number because their GCD is 2. So it says if m and n are relative prime numbers and if x and y are positive integers, there would always be only one ordered pair of x and y that will satisfy this relationship, which is mx plus ny equals to t. Cram it, note it, copy it, take the picture, do whatever is possible, because this is one of the key concept on which there would be at least two questions framed in the GMAT. So M and R and our relative prime numbers, and they will not be asking it directly. You will be solving any particular question, and this situation would come, or you may have to start from this particular logic to reach out to solution of some question. But this is majorly tested. Relative prime property, there is only one pair of set. Sometimes there are two and three also. Like for example, 3x plus 5y equals to 21. 3 and 5 are relative primes. The only set is 2 comma 3. Let's talk about this question. If m and n are integers which are greater than 1, they're integers, they're greater than 1, there are two variables. What is the value of m plus n? Okay. So if I solve this particular question through simple variable approach, it says two variables, definitely my answer should be C. I'll just combine both the conditions. Now 3m plus 4n is 23, mn is equals to 10. M and n are greater than 1 and the product is 10. So see, if they were not greater than 1, then 1 times 10 should have been also a possibility. But since they are greater than 1, the only possible case for a product of 10 would be 2 comma 5. So if that is the case, m equals to 2, and if I put m equals to 2 and n equals to 5, or see, I just have to find m plus n, so that's a commutative. 2 plus 5 or 5 plus 2, that gives me 7. So condition 2 alone is sufficient here. So now this is again a trap because it seems like C is the answer, but since it's an integer question, I have to go back and check A and B. That is what the trap is. They'll show you the thing so easily that you'll fall for it. I need two variables. I've given two things. Let's solve. C should be the answer. But that is the biggest mistake. So if answer A or B is found too easily, consider D as the possible answer. This is CMT4B. Let's talk about 1. It says 3m plus 4n. 3 and 4 are the relative primes. Now see, relative prime doesn't say that both number has to be prime. It only says that the common factor should be only 1. 1 is a number. So 3 and 4, the HCF of 3 and 4 is 1. So they are relative primes. That means for this particular expression, 3m plus 4n equals to 23, there would be only one set of ordered pair of m and n, wherein m would be 5, n would be 2. 15 plus 8 equals to 23. That works upon. So 5 and 2, 5 plus 2 is 7. So I've got my answer. So the answer would be D. So you started with C, ending up at D. So this is wherein I say, so integer question, start with A and B checking, go for, if A and B both happens to be sufficient, mark answer is D or either A and B. If that doesn't work, definitely try out with C as your combined. Very beautiful concept on this particular thing. What is a perfect number? So K is a perfect number only if the sum of all the factors of K, sum of all the factors of K is twice of it, or it's twice the value of integer. Or let's say if K is a perfect number, then sum of all the factors would be 2K. Please make sure that you have understanding of this. 2 to the power of n minus 1 times 2 to the power n minus 1 is a perfect number, where n is a prime number. If you want to make a note of it, you can please. This will help you to solve a lot of expressions quickly. If we substitute 2 here, I get 2 times 3 with a 6. The factors of 6 are 1, 2, 3, 6. Let's add up all those. 2 plus 1 is 3, 3 plus 3 is 6, 6 plus 6 is 12. The sum of factors of 6 is 2 times 6. So this is a perfect number. Next perfect number is when n is 3. So always remember, for the prime number, it's 2 to the power n minus 1 times 2 to the power n whole minus 1. Let's talk about this question. If a certain integer k is a perfect number, then the sum of all the factors of k is twice to the value of k. If k is a perfect number, what is the sum of all the factors of k except 1 and itself? It's pretty easy if you don't get confused. See, perfect number is already there on the screen right now, 2 to the power n minus 1 and so. We know that the sum of all the factors of k will be 2k. Now they don't want to include the number itself and 1. So if that is the case, then just subtract 2 from 2k, subtract 1, and then subtract the k, the number itself. So that makes it k minus 1, which is b. Simple. So again, you don't have to take a number first, then try hit and trial to get to know whether it's a perfect or not, and then reducing itself and the 1 out of it. So in certain times you need to remember some rules or logics to be applied quickly. So avoid hit and trial methods. Let's talk a number of relative primes. Find the number of positive integer which are less than n. They always have a 1 as a common factor. This is the formula to find the number of the relative primes. N times 1 minus 1 over p1, 1 minus 1 over p2, and so on. This is all for the different prime numbers. Let's take an example. Let's take n equals to 6. Now let's find all the positive integers which are less than 6. So they are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. How many are co-primes with 6? So they are only 1 and 5. And 5 and 6 both have only 1 as a common factor. So answer would be 2. If you want to solve it through this formula, what you could do is 6 can be broken as 2 times 3. So there are two prime numbers. So you could take n as 6, 1 minus 1 over 2, and 1 minus 1 over 3. 1 minus 1 over 2 is half. 1 minus 1 over 3 is 2 over 3. If you multiply, you get 2. You can apply any of the logics. I majorly apply the first one, but the second one is more easier. But if you don't remember it, I'll say remember both. What is the number of positive integers less than 10 such that they have no common factor with 10 except 1? Let's talk about these numbers. This is the formula that we are about to apply. We'll solve by two methods. First is by counting all the integers. So what are the integers less than 10? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9. Let's talk about those numbers which have no common factors. 1, 3, 7, 9. So total we have 4. By the formula method also, you could say 10 can be written as a product of two prime factors 2 and 5. So 10 times 1 minus 1 over 2, 1 minus 1 over 5. And that is wherein you could always talk about as 4. If someone has any question regarding this, you can always write in the chat box or in Q&A. All right. So, I mean, today I've got a chance to show you the trap question, possibility of looking C as an answer, but escaping from the trap and marking A and B, or working on the same high agenda of integers advanced part with a Q 51, 48, 49, and 50 level questions. This was a sum up of everything that a student struggles at. And that is what I got a better chance to talk about it today. So I would wish if there is something that you even if you got to miss out, what you can do is you can go back to this webinar, pay attention to every slides. And if there is anything, you can definitely talk to me over the call. You can book a call, consultation call, either through the website or GMAT Club, or you could write into the email with us. Talking about the Math Revolution courses, you guys are pretty aware about this. Anyone choosing to raise the score have got you know, the exam very nearby. Shortcut is pretty good course. If you want to start with the trial pack, you could definitely have a 7 days of some topics and lessons all in one. If you're just about to start your GMAT journey, uh, 199 plan or 159 plan is good to go. Private tutoring is up to you. You can often talk about the consultation and get to know how does the private tutoring works, and you can often listen from your respective tutors about the same. If you have anything, you can WhatsApp us. We've started that particular facility as well. So if you got a couple of questions which could be tweaked out easily, just WhatsApp us and the backend team would be taking care of it. Having said so, at the end, like, thank you so much for your patience. Thank you so much for attending this webinar. Definitely, this is considered to be a good source, but just don't sit idle. Go back to this videos or any other webinars wherein you've been following and pay attention to every slides. What does it mean? What does it say? A small information. The next webinar is on permutation because I conducted a webinar on combination and probability, but not on permutation. So the next webinar is on permutation, and that happens to be on Saturday this time, not Sunday. So I'm telling it to you just because I know a lot of you attend the webinar rigorously and religiously, so that you could definitely schedule your commitments and everything. So it would be on January 6th, not sorry, February 6th. My mistake, February 6th, not 7th. So that is, but you will get the invitation too. So having with the same words, take care of yourself and good night. Thank you so much for your time. Bye bye.